Well, hello and welcome. And today we are looking at the report, the expenditure in advance appropriation January to March. So basically, by law, as we are going into an election year, the Minister of Finance, 3 months to time, will have to bring a sort of a projection of what he or she may hope to spend coming into the first quarter of next year, because there could be a change of government, and before any government can spend money, it has to be law. You can't just dip your hands into the government pockets and spend it. So you have to sort of project how much you think you would need for the first quarter. This only happens sort of when you're running into an election. And so it happens that Mr. Seth Terkper went to Parliament and asked for 10.999 billion, nearly approximately 11 billion cedis, to see him through the next quarter of first quarter of 2017. So we're here to look at the figures and find out if indeed is enough, if it's asked for too much or too little. Two things come to mind. Capital expenditure seems a bit low, and compensation of employees look a bit high. They're taking about 40% of the monies that he's taking. Is that what should happen? I don't know, but I have an economist in the house to take us through an education, and then we just look at how it is that we got here, and on an ideal place, on an ideal economic situation, where should we be? But I cannot finish by saying massive thank you to all you guys. When I was running around my campaign asking for votes, you took the time, took your phone and sent out your text for me. This year we didn't win the TV award. Last year and the year before we got Current Affairs Show Host of the Year, but this year we got Radio Talk Show Host of the Year. So those of you who are not close to Accra and far away, yes, I also do radio, and so your votes help me. So we won Radio Talk Show Host of the Year, and I want to say massive thank you for voting. My name is Nana Ansakwa the Fourth, Akwamwe Dumasahini, and also your host. When I come back, I'm talking to Dr. Osei Sibe. Don't even move. Come on. Well, economics, as you all know, my economic degree is only from Edumasan, so it doesn't go that far. So anytime we have to talk economics beyond Edumasan, I need somebody whose degree goes beyond Edumasan, probably even international. So with me in the studio is Dr. Eric Osei Sibe, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Ghana. He's also, a brother and a church colleague, church mate, worship brother. We go to the same church. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And it's been a while. I've been Kobolo, too many.
Yeah, not you alone. Even me, I found myself most of the time out of town, and so
I won't feel
it's
too
been a
bad.
while.
I shouldn't feel too bad.
So don't
too many
feel,
engagements. This coming Saturday, I think I have like 3 weddings and 2 funerals. How I'm going to manage it, only God knows, but I'll do my best.
but let me congratulate you for winning that beautiful plaque. It's really beautiful, and I think you deserve it.
Thank you.
Your program is so educative,
Doctor listens to, that's my opinion, every now and then.
Yeah, I do. I can't miss it on Monday evening, Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. So if you haven't tuned in yet, you have to. Monday, 8 p.m. on Joy FM. That's my opinion. You have to tune in, and you can agree with me or disagree with me. Just do it agreeably. But Doc, we're looking at this budget, and anytime a budget is presented, we the laymen economics people will pick it up and argue it out, blindly. But we need academic, education on this. So by law, getting up to elections, you need to give a projection of what you think you may spend in the first quarter, and then you go. So what are your preliminary comments on the figures that have been presented?
Well, I mean, as you said earlier on, this is due to constitutional demands. The Appropriation Act actually requires that before you can spend from the consolidated fund, you need parliamentary approval. And as you know, November, December, we have an election. Normally, this thing should have been done in November, but because of the intensity of election, and the presidential and parliamentary government do it necessary to take it in October, so that November and December they can be free to do their campaigns and all that. So it's appropriate that it's late in Parliament, and so that for whichever government that comes to power next year, that the first 3 months, it will be able to meet certain statutory commitments. For example, paying road fund, servicing our debts, paying salaries. These are statutory payments that you cannot wait until you put out your budget. The non-core ones or the discretionary ones can wait, but the statutory payment, you cannot wait. So it gives whichever government that comes to power the first 3 months, to be able to put your own plans together, to be able to draw up your own budget. Before then, you still need to pay these statutory funds. So it gives you that kind of leeway to be able to effect that. So it's absolutely necessary. Now, on the issue of the numbers, because it's just the first 3 months, it doesn't really say much, but of course, it still projects some level of deficit, because the expenditure far outweighs the revenue, the expected revenue, even for the first 3 months. The expenditure being about 10 point something billion Ghana cedis, whereas the revenue is about 8.9. Mean that there's still a gap in terms of deficit. So means that we're going to continue with the deficit in the 2017 first quarter of the year. It also shows that we're still paying quite a chunk of the money in interest payments, interest costs. It's still very high, about 1.8 billion, compared to expenditure on capital expenditure, which is just about 1.2. Yes, so that means that chunk of the funds, the expenditure, about a quarter of it would actually be going into interest payments alone. So that is quite huge. And then also, huge amount of it would also have to go into compensation, and that is wages and salaries to government workers. It's also quite high, about 3.8 thereabout. So that is how the disbursement will go in the first quarter of the year. Yeah.
Doc, should we spend our way out of trouble, or should we be prudent our way out of trouble? I mean, if today I was made president, I said, look, Doc, you're good with the economy, and I give you the economy, would you spend your way out of trouble, or would you cut, expenditure out of trouble? What should we do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always dicey, because the society wants you to spend. It's the government expenditure that often drives the economy. It's called a stimulus to the economy. Without government expenditure, often the economy doesn't really expand that much. But it's not just about government expenditure. It is where government is spending the money that is most critical. That is what will actually drive the levers of the productive sectors of the economy. If the expenditure mostly go into consumption, then you don't expect it to benefit the people that much. It will rather fuel inflation, and then the increasing inflation means that all other macroeconomic indicators will also begin to rise. And you also have to be mindful, where is the government getting the money to spend? It is also critical. If the expenditure is coming from revenue that has been generated by the economy, then often there is no problem, all right, because it's your own money that you are spending. But where government spends more than it has collected as revenue, then there's a problem. It leaves a gap, what we call the fiscal gap, the deficit, right? Meaning your expenditure is more than your revenue. So what then government have to do? The government has to finance that gap, and that is where the trouble comes. In financing that gap, you either have to borrow domestically or you borrow externally. Okay. Now, when you borrow domestically, it has implication on the domestic economy, because then you are going to the credit market and to compete with the private sector borrowing. Then you are more likely to push the prices up, you know, because you are borrowing on a bigger scale, and the banks and other institutional investors often like to lend to government.
Secure.
Secure. It's a safe haven for many of them. So then they begin to crowd out the private sector, interest rates to begin to go up high, and
example to a layman, let's say somebody's in SS who's watching from us. So you are government of Ghana, so you are the finance minister.
Right.
And then maybe I am just an Ansakwa for multimedia. And then we go into a bank. So we come to the bank and I say, look, I need maybe 1 million to go and buy new cameras for multimedia. And you, the government, also come and say, look, give me 5 million, I'm going to go and pay teachers.
Yeah.
But I will give you what, 23% interest back of that money you give me. So the bank then thinks, no.
The bank, because you are an individual, tomorrow as you step out, anything can happen to you. So the risk associated with you is much higher. We call it idiosyncratic risk. You know, you can easily default. So the probability of default for an individual or a firm that is going to borrow from the bank is much higher than government. Government is a continual, you know, it's a continuity. There's no way government will default, you know, unless the government is declared bankrupt, you know.
Which won't happen.
Which won't happen, because whatever debt that the government accumulates, whenever its successor comes, it has an obligation to honor that debt, you know. So it's safer to lend to government. So if government comes and they say that, well, I am ready to pay 23% for this amount, why not? Banks are in business to make money. You know, they are profit maximization organizations. They want to maximize their profit. So they will immediately give the money to government.
I mean, it is so safe that even at 30% to the private individual, they would rather 23% and go to sleep.
Yeah, go to sleep, because it's risk-free. You know, the individual has huge risk. Like banks, as we're talking, are recording very high non-performing loans, right? And these are monies that have been lent to private and then parastatals, you know, like the VRAs and other ECGs and other companies, the BDCs, right? These are quasi-government organizations and also the private sectors. But if it's government, then obviously, you know, government have to honor, because anytime government default, then it increases the interest rate more, because it increases the government risk, the risk profile, you know, which makes it dangerous for the financial system. So government will normally not default. You know, that is why even at the average lending rate of 33% and the treasury bill rate of 22%, banks will still prefer to give the money to government. And that is what we call the crowding out, because it means that, one, the money will not be available, will not be enough for the private sector to borrow. Two, the interest cost is so high for many private borrowers, potential borrowers, to afford. So it actually deprives them of access to credit, and which is needed to actually expand businesses, create wealth, create employment, and all that. And so that is where the problem is. So if government spends, and the expenditure, they borrow from a chunk of it from the domestic market, it keeps interest rates up there. If it's borrowing from external sources, fine, it doesn't have immediate effect on the economy, but it exposes governments to external shock. The external vulnerability will be high, so that if anything should happen in the international market, it affects the economy, because the money that the government is borrowing is denominated into the hard currency, the dollar, which means that in terms of repayment, government has to mobilize domestic cedis and buy and purchase dollar in order to be able to service this debt. And so it tends to put a lot of pressure on the domestic currency. So that can, you know, actually accelerate the depreciation of the currency and all that, yeah.
So spend or cut will depend on where the money will be coming from.
Yes, it will depend on where the money will be coming from.
In our case now, we know where the money comes from. It comes from local and international.
And international.
Not,
and that
not
is
so
where
much from revenue.
That's not so. And because expenditure, like I said, drives the economy. You know, it's a stimulus to the economy. But if you are not generating enough in terms of revenue, and you keep spending over and over your revenue, then you are compelled to borrow. And it has implications on the economy.
So if you're the minister, you will cut our way out of trouble?
Well, you need to reduce your expenditure significantly, to whatever you are generating, so that gradually you reduce your deficit. That is what we call the fiscal consolidation. So the fiscal consolidation essentially.
Will it be brutal for the minister to say, listen, I'm making 8 billion in 7.2 million in revenue, and that's my budget. I'm not spending more than that. Is it suicidal?
Well, I mean, that we call that the balanced budget, balancing your budget. So that means making sure that your revenue is just equal to your expenditure. Well, I mean, ideally, that is what should have been the case, so that you record zero deficit. But we are a developing country. We need certain amount of injection into the economy. We have huge infrastructure deficits. The energy situation, the road networks, and all that, the demand for such infrastructure is high, and the housing and all that. So we cannot really say that a balanced budget is the way to go. But even where you want to overspend, there is a cap. Normally you don't have to exceed 3% of your collected revenue. Whenever you go beyond that, then you'll be more dominant in the local economy, because you have to borrow to finance it. Certain amount of borrowing is okay. Every economy, U.S. market, the Japan market, all of them borrows. Governments borrow, but it's not just about the borrowing. It's about the terms of borrowing, which is very important, and then the cost of borrowing, which is also very important, because that then put a lot of pressure on the repayment. If the term of borrowing is just a short term, borrowing on short dated bills, like the 91-day treasury bills, and then the 182-day treasury bill that governments keep demanding, and then the interest costs is also so high compared to others, then it exerts a lot of fiscal pressure on you for repayments, because within a very short time, the maturity date is up, and you have to find money. And because you are not generating more, you have to go to the market to borrow to refinance this maturing debt. And over, you'll be accumulating your debt.
But you see, the tax revenue 7.299 over the period where we want to spend 11 billion. Look, you see, the amount of business class tickets, first class tickets, luxury cars, accommodation. You see, I lived in London before.
Right.
And I worked in a company, and they'll bring you a long list of company cars. You can choose anything you want. But the tax on the car, you will pay. As for the car, vehicle, the cost of the vehicle, the company is giving to you as their car. So if you wanted a V8 would have about 110,000 Ghana cedis worth of tax element on it. Because if you imported a V8 today, if you go to the port, you pay about 110,000 Ghana cedis. So that's the government can give to you.
No.
The car you can have.
Right.
So that if they gave you a V8 to drive, every month they would deduct money from your wages to go and pay for that tax.
Right.
Look, if we and rent, there's a tax element in rent.
Exactly.
So that if they gave you a house in cantonments, the average rent in cantonments is probably about $5,000, $6,000, $8,000. The tax element of it comes from your wages. If we apply this thing, right, we will stay within this 7.2, because there are ministers who fly business class to go and beg for money to come and dig boreholes. When the guys with the money are bringing the borehole, they fly economy. So I'm just pushing you to say that, can you be that prudent and say, listen, wise up, we're living beyond our means, this is what we earn and this is what we have to make?
Essentially, that should be the case. You're very right, because sometimes it's not all the expenditures that goes into productive sectors. Many of them are just frivolous. Many of the things that you spoke about, buying V8s and flying first class, business class, and others, you have to be a bit frugal. Looking at, there's just this common say that cut the the size of your clothes, the clothes according to the size of it, right? So knowing that you are not generating more, the economy is really not expanding. You do not embark on expenditures that do not have direct bearing on productive sectors of the economy. Otherwise, you worsen the situation, you know, because like you said, it's going to fuel inflation. All the other macroeconomic indicators are going to go up, and it becomes like vicious cycle. You know, the business sector will not be doing well, so you will not be able to get enough taxes from them, and so your revenue goes up, and you still continue to spend. You then have to borrow. Your debt levels goes up, and your interest payment goes up. Like now, we are paying about 10 billion this year alone for interest payment. That is about 30% of the total expenditure. So if you are spending total 30% of your total expenditure on only debt servicing, okay, and you are paying about 49% of it for salaries and wages, then how much is left for capital expenditure? The one that will actually drive production, drive growth of the economy. And that is where this economy finds itself now, because capital expenditure last year was just about 12%, you know, whereas debt servicing alone is about 30%, more than a quarter of our total expenditure. So if economy is run like that, obviously the economy cannot expand as fast as you want it to expand. So it wasn't surprising that the IMF came out last time to revise our growth projections, you know, for the year from about 4 point something to 3.5 this year, which is one of the lowest we've recorded in many, many years. So it's because of this fiscal deficit that we recorded in some time past from 2012, about 12%, and government have to borrow hugely from the domestic market, you know, that led to increases in inflation, increases in interest rate and all that. So the private sector really is not doing well, and it's the private sector that is the engine of growth. They will expand the economy. So if the private sector is not doing well, no matter how much you increase the tax levels, you're still not going to be able to generate enough revenue, because there's what we call tax buoyancy. You know, your ability to generate more revenue from taxes depends on the growth of the economy. So if the economy is not expanding, it's not growing, you can increase the tax level, or you can, but it will not give you the needed revenue. So you can see, even after all the taxes that have been imposed on the economy, revenue generation is underperforming. It's not really doing well because the private sector is not doing well. That is simple economics.
I mean, they said that 88% of the economy is also informal.
Yeah, it's informal. Yeah, thereabout.
Is it too large?
About 86.7% of the labor force are found within the informal sector. That's what it means.
Is it too large?
That's very large. So the informal sector is huge. So there are a lot of things that are also happening, really, that are not being captured. And for some of us, what we have said is that the people paying taxes in this country are just too few. And so when you keep increasing the taxes, you are overburdening them, and you kill initiative and incentive to work much harder. What is needed? Every government will definitely need taxes to expand the economy. What is really needed is to broaden the tax base, you know, find a more innovative way to going into the informal sector.
Let me take a break and find out how innovative way to reduce this informal thing, because this is one thing that's really, really been bugging me as to what does the government do to make sure all this over 80% of its labor force come into some sort of a formal arrangement, so you know who is working where, and pay their dues, so that they can also use the same roads and the clinics that we all use. Don't move, we're coming back. Well, thank you very much for staying, and we are looking at the first quarter budget 2017 and the economy, which has been a major issue, as you can know, during this campaign. Economy is really at the forefront. So we're just trying to find out, how it is that we can make the economy better. Just before the break, we're looking at over 86.7% of labor force, all in the informal sector. So basically, he wakes up in the morning, picks up a headpan, walks around, sees a building being built up, goes there, carries a bit of sand, gets 20 cedis, 30 cedis, goes home. Picks a cutlass, goes to the bush, sees somebody's got a farm. Can I help you weed? Yeah, help me weed. Weeds it, takes his money, go home. So if you take, if assuming 100 people were working in Ghana, over 80% of the people are doing this, and just what, 12% of you put on your tie and come and sit here and speak big English and pay tax and go home. The rest of the people are all below the radar.
Yeah.
So unless they buy something that is taxed, whatever they earn, they take home.
And what is even interesting and sometimes more worrying is the fact that among the 87% or 86% that we are talking about more than 70%, in fact, about 72% are classified as vulnerable.
Wow.
The work that they are doing is classified as vulnerable or indecent work. The vulnerable
standing at traffic lights,
and it's just like from hand to mouth. We also call them working poor. You see them working, but they are poor. So the issue is, well, we say that we have to tax these people, but what kind of provision that we have made to ensure that the kind of job that they are doing is decent enough, is protected enough,
and
is
you need to earn a certain
enough
amount to start attracting tax, right?
to start attracting tax. But what they are getting really is below the tax band, far below it, So the government also, when you go to such people to say that pay tax, they begin to ask you, we don't even have a place to go to toilet where we in the market where we want to visit nature's call. We don't have roof over our heads, so why
sleep on the pavement?
Sleep on the pavement. Nobody's planning for them. So why should they pay tax for what? So it's a two-way thing. There's a need for us to find a way of organizing the informal sector, formalizing the informal sector, making sure that the jobs that they do is much more secured and a little bit more decent, and which have a kind of a good returns that will also make them be able to pay taxes to government. People plying their trade on the streets, the street hawkers, and all that. One, they're exposing themselves to danger. How much can they really make in a day? So it's government. We need to have a bigger plan for these huge informal vulnerable sector that are in just menial jobs from hand to mouth. They're working, but they still sleep on the streets. So it's difficult, but that is the one area that is drawing also the economy back. And if we are able to transform that sector and ensure that people who are there actually get themselves decent work, become more productive, much more stable, and much more protected, I think this economy will do well. Because many advanced economies, developed economies, tend to have very few people that work in such sectors, over less than 2%, 5%. But look at us here. It's still growing by the day because many people finish school, they don't get jobs.
Over 80%.
And the informal sector market is free entry, free exit. Nobody controls it. So that is why when we do the statistics for unemployment in Ghana, you often found out that the unemployment rate is very low. You understand? Despite the fact that many people have finished school and they're not getting job, because you don't want to just sit at home and do nothing. So if you have a table in front of your house, you just put it there, and if it's cigarette, you start selling. So you start doing something.
Scratch cards,
or you put water on your head and you'll be selling, and you call that job because you are doing some kind of activity. But how decent, is this job? That is a question.
So in that case, you need to have a whole structure, formula, policy to mop up.
Integrated one. Inclusive growth. The reason why sometimes it's funny when we talk about growth in Ghana, because our growth in Ghana has largely been exclusive, not inclusive. If the time when we're growing 15% and we are patting ourselves and say that our growth is the highest in the world, how many jobs did it create for the youth? Very few. because our growth essentially is being driven by the extractive sector, which is highly capital intensive. You know, the oil and gas, the mining. That is what is driving growth. But those sectors that are labor intensive are today not doing well. We're talking about the agricultural sector. Agriculture is on the decline. Okay, the last data that was released, it just grew by about 2.5% thereabout. And it's not doing well. The manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, this year, the second quarter, it grew by -5%. And these are the sectors, particularly the manufacturing sector, that can, you know, have casual labor, can actually get people to work. So, because elsewhere, we've lived in Britain and other places before. There's the manufacturing sector, people that go, you know, there, you can get some work in the night, in the evening to generate money. And so if that sector is not doing well, then you don't expect the teeming majority of your people, the school leavers and others, to get jobs. They will find themselves, in the streets. And so you see by the day, the number of kids or youth in the streets of Accra, you know, are increasing because there are no jobs. And looking at the fact that with this fiscal consolidation and the net freeze on formal sector employment, and the fact that the private sector is also equally not doing well because of the unfriendly nature of the economic conditions now, then where lies the fate of this our youth? This is a big problem.
I mean, Doc, is it one of the things that I mean, to turn this thing around, you have to be too brutal. You know, you really have to reform.
Yeah.
No, but now I think what I see is more of a patchwork, or, you know, look, I see more management than a reform. I mean, can you manage your way out of this trouble, or we need to put the brakes on and reform our way out of trouble?
We need to put a brake and reform. Redirect, okay, reinvigorate our thinking, our way of doing things.
Can we handle that? Is it not too brutal?
Well, I mean, it comes to a point where you need radical measures to be able to turn things around, because we cannot go the status quo. We cannot follow the same path that we have followed. There's a need for us to critically think, what is it that we can do to expand the productive base of this economy? It is not so much about, I've often said that we are over-concentrating on demand-driven policies. The central bank and the Ministry of Finance and others, there are so much demand-driven policies. You know, fiscal consolidation, increasing taxes, cutting expenditure, the Bank of Ghana raising the monetary policy rates because inflation, we want to achieve certain inflation target. All of these tend to stifle the real sector growth. You know, so not too much emphasis is being put on growth. So you look at the fact that our non-traditional exports, you know, are not doing well. Our export cocoa, in fact, cocoa growth over the last 3 years has been, it's up at -1.2% growth in cocoa. And this is the sector, you know, that is actually highly responsive to poverty reduction because it is rural based. You know, and if it's actually flourishes, it's going to create much more employment for the rural folks. That sector is not doing well. So instead of us overemphasizing these demand-driven policies, if we emphasize more on making sure that we are able to have a target of, say, 1 million tons of cocoa, and we put resources, you know, we create land banks that we are able to actually have bigger plantation with all the mechanization and the tractors and others, and everyone's eye. We take the National Service people to work on bigger plantations, and we ensure that it works. We have irrigation facilities to ensure that 365 days we are working. In no time, you are able to create the necessary production, create the necessary employment. So you don't really have to be adjusting your interest rate because you are bringing in the necessary revenue. People are getting jobs to do. And what happens? Government is able to rope in much more tax revenue. So it begins to reduce the borrowing, and then interest rates begin to come down. It is only when your productive sectors are so weak and you don't generate enough income that you have to resort to such borrowing because your tax base is very low, about 16 to 17% of GDP. In any serious economy, it's about 32–40%.
Wow.
Yeah. So we are really not doing well. And for me, that is where the focus should be. For any future government or anyone or going into the future, we need to really find policies that reduces the bottleneck in production, ensure that we mechanize, ensure that the manufacturing sector has a conducive environment to produce. If you look at the World Bank index for doing business, we are about 170 out of 210 or so % countries, which means we're really not doing well.
You're not competitive.
And not at all. And these days, we don't talk about comparative advantage anymore. You can have all your cocoa, all your gold. It's not about comparative advantage. It's about competitive advantage, ability to produce at a lower cost. That is what matters.
Well, I mean, energy prices in this country are quite high. Yeah. And miraculously, those who use energy for business pay more than those who use it for TV. Interest rates are very high, and I don't think any bank will loan you, 5 years, forget it. You won't get a 5-year loan. So, with all these things, facing you, how does industry grow?
That's the problem. The industries today are reeling under very difficult economic conditions. Tax levels are so high, utility levels are high, interest rates are high. Interest rate is one of the highest. The monetary policy rate is the 3rd highest in the world, apart from Argentina and I think Sudan also.
Wow.
3rd highest. Interest rate today in Africa is one of the highest. Not even to talk about the war-stricken countries and others. They even have much stable, lower interest rate than we do. So the economic conditions is really not conducive enough, and much more has to be done.
The interest rate, is it because of default, the high risk default? I mean, what is caused? I mean,
a lot of factors.
Here, we don't know where you live, addressing system, default system.
Yeah, it's part to be blamed. What we call the high non-performing loans. But that has also been fueled by the fact that interest rate itself is very high. So when interest rate is very high, you are likely, the theory said that you are likely to attract pool of risk borrowers. You understand what we call the moral hazards or adverse selection. Because the interest rate is high, the person who gets the money tend to invest the money in highly risk ventures so that you can make high returns and be able to pay the interest rate. And wherever the returns is high, the risk is high. So the probability of default will often be higher because of the high risk. So that has something to play. There's also another issue with many of the banks that have learned to parasitate us, the 4 energy sectors, what we call the legacy debts, monies that are gone to VRA, monies that are gone to ECG, money that have gone to BDCs, and money that have gone to TOR. Now, last year, these 4 combined, their losses were about 1.3 of GDP, and their liabilities alone is about 13%, the banks that they own. And these companies are not doing well. Their balance sheets are in red, and that is really affecting the banks. So what can the banks do in this situation? Banks then have to hold back on lending. So the last quarter data that was released by the central bank, the growth in bank credit to the private sector, last year was about 24%. As of July this year, it has fallen to 8%.
That's a big drop.
Yes. So banks are also...
They're not giving the money out.
They're not giving the money out because the risk is so high. And there are a lot of big companies that are owning them, they have not been able to settle. So it's really a huge problem. And therefore, a lot has to be done. Otherwise, the whole thing is so knitted together.
Doc, are we overwhelmed?
Well,
it's a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it doesn't look too good. But of course, I mean, we are very hopeful that things can turn around if the right set of policies are put in place and we begin to do the right things. Yeah, because if you read the IMF reports, they say that, well, government has done well, but the downside risk remains very high for the economy. You know, we are so high debt distressed country, and we keep borrowing when our GDP is shrinking. You know, now we have even the wage bill that we are trying to reduce according to the program, the IMF program. We are supposed to reduce it to about 35% or so of taxes. If you look at the number of people that are waiting on government payroll, that are waiting to be enrolled, you know, I doubt that we'll be able to achieve that.
Another issue that kept coming up was the idea that from next year onwards, you know, government wasn't going to hire anymore, and because of political rationalization, government won't hire, government will sack. No, we're not sacking, we're downsizing this, and then they have all these technical words. But truth of the matter is that from 2017, you know, unless somebody dies in the workplace, no one is coming in. But on the other hand, I mean, I think government has about 650,000 people that it employs. It's about enough, isn't it? I mean, government doesn't need to employ more, even though I think we need more teachers.
Yeah.
I think
but the fact is, the economy. You have not stopped training teachers. You have not stopped training nurses. You know, and even as we speak, there are some schools in the hinterlands that do not have teachers, so they are needed. There are hospitals in some hinterlands that do not have doctors. They do not have nurses, and you're still actually training these people. Now, where should they go? Definitely, you have to absorb them.
Let me take a quick break here, because this is a very tricky issue, and I will give you an example of what I heard in Harrow and see if it will work here. Take you. Well, thank you very much for staying, and we're looking at employment. And I was just going to tell about a story. I interviewed Mr. KB Asante's daughter, who was the past mayor of Harrow. So the Harrow Borough will be like a district. So it's a Jamaican district. So they give their bill to central government that, look, this year we need maybe 200 million to pay our teachers and everything. They go. So when they went, the bill was 75 million pounds short, the money they gave them. And they said, that's it. Apart from education, go manage. We don't care. So when they came back to Harrow, instead of sweeping the street 5 days a week, they cut it down to 3. Some of the police stations within the borough will close at 5, and then some will run 24 hours. The clinics that are close to, let's say, if it's Dansoman, those that are close to Kaneshie, they speak to Kaneshie, so they share one clinic. I mean, anybody that has a secretary, they ask you, look, either you can type or you go, because we can't pay the secretary. Those who have a driver say, Jack, now you have to drive to work. So, I mean, they were that brutal, because apart from education, they are 75 million pounds short. Can we also apply some of these things to say, look, you can't have 2 secretaries anymore. You can't have a driver for you and your wife. You can't have a policeman following you all the time if you feel you are. I mean, I don't know. Can we also apply these things?
Well, that is when we have been able to prove that the difficulty that we are in is as a result of, for example, overstaffing, in the public sector, or overpayment in the public sector. But I mean, we are really yet to establish that. There's this study that we've started that we are trying to look whether indeed the public sector is overstaffed, or is the amount is being paid too much. That's the reason why government keep recording that high deficit. But of course, that is not the only problem. There's what austerity is there. You can have very austere measures, to reduce the number of time people work and all that, and maybe find a way of cutting their wages and all that. Those measures are there.
GES had what, 41,000 drivers at one time?
Yeah. So that's smart way of looking at some of these things. But because sometimes some of the workers are really not needed, you know. But the issue is when you let these people stay out, how much are you saving? Is the saving enough to actually reduce your fiscal deficit? You have to look at that, because if you really look at the data and you look at really how much would you save, it's usually not that big. So there's a lot more that needs to be done just, you know, sacking people or making sure that the number of hours that you work reduces and others. But of course, I mean, it's a two-way thing. The society must also have to be responsive, and you know, because much as government is paying you, we also have to ensure that we deserve what we are getting. The productivity of the public sector has to increase so that, you know, with the little that you are getting, you have to be able to make sure that you will get more from the public sector. As it stands now, it's like what President Kufuor sometimes said, that the government is pretending to pay you and the civil servants are also pretending to work. You know, so really, there's not much going on. You know, but if these people that are receiving government money, the teachers and others, if you look at the absenteeism in the schools and others, although they are receiving pay, many of them don't turn up in classrooms and all the others. So there's a lot of laxity, there's a lot of low production in both the public sector and from the productivity of government sector in terms of government-owned investment and others. They are all low. So really not helping the economy, you know. So, but I think that as people, we have to make sure that the little that is actually even coming to us, we work it to the best of our ability. Everyone should feel responsible towards the economy and ensure that you pay your tax, you work as is expected of you.
That's including the 70% out of the 86% who are, because it's not the heart is willing, but the body is weak.
Yeah, so sometimes it's, you know, it's disheartening when you pay taxes and you don't really see what the monies have been used for, and that becomes, you know, it discourages people from even paying more taxes.
Doc, I want to say thank you very much for that. I know as for the economy, we need to do part 1, part 2, part 3, and many parts, but it's a bit scary knowing that a huge chunk of the workforce just simply don't have anything to offer.
Yeah,
the opportunity.
Vulnerable.
It's not that they don't want to, but he's selling inflatable penguins in front of Fiesta Royal. How much is he going to earn to give anything to the state? But I think we need to all work hard and see how we can include them and get the best out of this strong army of people that we have in the country. Let me say big thank you to Nana Okru Kata Accra Hine for the Abedru Festival. It was wonderful this Saturday if you were there. So Nana Okru Kata, well done. I want to say well done to Odeno Hokwafakoto III, who hosted the Eastern Region Tourism Award. Beautiful event at the Century Royal. That was very fun. And I want to say massive thank you to you once again for sending in your votes and giving us this lovely award, Radio Talk Show Host of the Year. Thank you very much. And 0243 336 001, and that's if you want to get a shirt just like me, give Tanti's Fashion a call. But Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I know, but I know we want to have you back to probably break it into sectors and then talk about it.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Tomorrow we're back to do this all over again.